1 week season.
Hey, and welcome in, OWS fam. So glad you are with us. We are back in the DFS lab, and as always, this show presented by 1 week season, where we build a lineup on DraftKings and then use it as a vehicle to talk about the upcoming slate. In this case, it is week 12. It is Friday, November 22nd, and obviously just around the corner from the Thanksgiving holiday. So, of course, next week going to be a lot of fun. But before we get there, we got week 12 here, and it's my pleasure to welcome up Papy. I'm your host, Cheeseman, by the way, and Papy. Yeah, man, quickly, let's look back at week 11. How did week 11 turn out for you?
It was a down week, not as bad as the previous week, but, a down week. It was just I didn't have Taysom Hill, which was incredibly frustrating because I like Taysom Hill and am generally a Taysom Hill supporter and had played him the previous couple of weeks. And, of course, this week I was like, it's going to be, Kamara who kills them, and sort of just overlooking Hill. I think that last TD he scored too was really the biggest gut punch, because I had a lot of Jonnu Smith, who was similar, till the end of the game, and then that 75-yarder that Hill broke on the last drive, and it was like, okay, well now you absolutely need Hill if you're going to win. And then I think the other thing I was off on, which I was more upset with myself about, probably from a strategic standpoint, was the Lions. And I just didn't have Lions onslaughts accounted for. I mean, I had some of their defense and their running game, but I really didn't think they were going to just mercilessly throw the ball deep into the fourth quarter if they were up, 4 or 5 touchdowns. And that's what they decided to do. So I was not huge on their receivers and their passing game. And that was where you needed to be, really, was there in Hill. So, it was an interesting week because none of those guys were that chalky, the guys you really needed. And so you had like these huge, 230 to 250 scores that you needed to like win a tournament. But the cash line, was relatively moderate because the chalkier guys really failed. And so, managed to get some teams over the cash line and get some back, but, certainly didn't get anything where I'd like to have it.
Yeah, it's always a tough week where you realize, like, there's that point in the slate where you realize I'm not winning first because I don't have like these pieces that are just going absolutely just nuclear. And so then you just shift into, okay, how many can I just sneak over the cash line to try and make back my losses here, or just inability to really be in position to ship one. So yeah, that was the position. Sounds like we were both in. Certainly was for me. I was down about 50% ROI. Thought that it was going to be a good week earlier. As I mentioned on the show already, I had some Jerry Jeudy, which that was talked about on the Slate podcast at 1 week season. Had a decent amount of Anthony Richardson, who he ended up going for like a really good salary multiplier, went for 30 plus. Kendrick Bourne was another one that was a great call in the Slate podcast and had been talked about. But again, like, Lions. Yeah, I mean, it's just the Lions were so expensive that you really had to go for like the scenario that ended up happening for them, which was they were up 28-6 at the half. And if they had just kind of run the ball and tried to kill the clock in the second half, I don't think that we would have seen the same score from them. So It feels like an outlier, not necessarily. I mean, I think you always can look at like, large home favorites. You can always look at them and say, I could just take the major pieces from this offense and hope they put up 40 or 50 points. That can be a viable strategy. But the Lions, that was just an outlier. I think the way that they played that in the second half. And I certainly wasn't on it. And I also wasn't on Taysom Hill. That just, it hurt so bad, man. Like, I had him the previous 2 weeks and then just somehow completely overlooked him. So what can you do?
Yeah, it hurts, man. Sometimes I was happy with the Jonnu Smith play. I was like, oh, that was good.
Yeah, that's huge.
Until I saw Taysom Hill putting up 50. But, if that's not DFS, then I don't know what is.
That's right, man. That was a rare game by Taysom Hill. So cool, man. Well, let's look at week 12. I'm going to pull up ownership here and got DraftKings here, but let's switch over to the ownership tab. And where do you want to look first on this ownership? By the way, we didn't mention injuries, but talking before, you said Isaiah Pacheco would be a key one, whether or not what his workload will be if he's activated for the Chiefs. And then I mentioned George Kittle. Obviously, if he plays, that's an upgrade to the San Francisco running game. And then Jake Ferguson is questionable for Dallas, and let me actually just see what the practice report was really fast. He did not practice on Thursday. So if he doesn't play, then Schoonmaker could be some value, some salary relief at tight end. But other than that, I don't think there's anything else major in terms of injuries. So unless you have anything else, what do you want to talk about here with ownership?
No, I think those are pretty much it. The big one for me is what about Kareem Hunt, because I wrote that game up, and he has very interesting pricing in that his price came down $1,000 despite being matched up against the Panthers. And so it's almost like that price is assuming he's the backup, which maybe he is, maybe he isn't. Even if they both play, he could still potentially be the guy who gets the work. If they both play, then I'll be less inclined, because I have to think it's probably going to be some type of a split. But if Hunt is the only RB that's playing there, then he's a screaming value at 5,700 in an excellent matchup. And the Chiefs almost are in the situation like the Lions were in sort of last week, where it was just like how badly do they want to pound the Panthers? There's really nothing in the matchup that says that the Chiefs are going to do anything but win that game easily. But do they want to win 21-7, or do they want to win 50-7? You're kind of always just sort of trying to guess that mindset of the coach, really. How badly do they want to kill them? Sort of like the Lions. That's really how I feel about the Chiefs this week.
Yeah, I saw someone, I think it was a comment on a video maybe that we did earlier this week, someone saying, like, as a Chiefs fan, like, Andy Reid is not going to come out and put up a gigantic score just because it's middle of the season. Like, he wants to save any fireworks for the playoffs kind of thing. And in a game where you can just kind of play vanilla and probably still win, maybe the Chiefs don't really get too aggressive. But, I mean, in terms of ownership, as you can see here, Travis Kelce, the second highest owned player on the slate projected right now. And then Kareem Hunt is up there as well. So, and it's interesting to see the Kareem Hunt ownership at this point. I guess maybe there's just the field is showing some level of certainty that Kareem Hunt is going to be the guy who gets the primary workload here.
Yeah, I almost feel like that's a hedge, that 17% ownership there, because if he's the only guy,
higher.
He's gonna be higher than that.
That's true.
And if he's not, I don't know if we'll get to 17%. So I feel like that's sort of a middling guess of like, we don't really know or not. I think he'll be higher or lower than that, depending on who's active. But yeah, it's interesting that that Kels is going to be so chalky. His pricing again is a little bit strange. He had a bad game, but he came down, I think, $500 in cost, and he gets a way better matchup. So the main thing that you'd have to be thinking of with Kels is like, is he just not going to have a big day because they just don't murder them, and so he kind of just has a mild day. But again, there's not a lot of in the matchup to say that like they're going to stop him.
Yeah, and the Chiefs have to move the ball somehow. So, yeah, absolutely. Anything else that you want to look at here with ownership? Let's see. Let me just pull up the QBs real fast. So, yeah, top three quarterbacks, Jaden Daniels, Geno Smith, Anthony Richardson. Anything that jumps out to you here in terms of quarterback ownership?
Yeah, so we'll talk. The guy who I'm going to use in the lineup, right, give the preview here, we'll talk about very low owned is Will Levis down there at 2% at 4.9. We're going to get creative in this one with this Millie Maker lineup. And, nobody wants to play him, and I understand why. He wasn't very good to start the year. But, if you look at his, box score, which I guess we'll do when we go into the lineup, he's been better the last 2 weeks since he's been back, and he contributes a little bit with his legs, and he's always been very aggressive. I mean, I liked him as a best ball play coming into the year, and that was largely because of his aggression and how much he likes to throw down the field. And that hasn't really changed. He's more than happy to play that way. So I think that, for somebody who's going to be basically unowned, and if you look at the slate this week, there's not really a standout game where you're necessarily saying like, I just have to have this game, or I really want to stack this game.
Very true.
So I feel like you can get creative this week and sort of pick a game that you can get with low ownership and sort of whatever narrative you think could happen in that game is a good way to go about, especially like a $20 Millie Maker lineup this week, in my opinion.
Absolutely. You want to jump into DraftKings and take a look
Sure.
now? So let's just a quick reminder to people, as you know, the focus of this show. This is not the show where we're trying to pick necessarily like the sharpest chalk, or not that we can't build a sharp lineup, but this is the Millie, so it's you have to be a little more risk taking in this one.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, if you go find Levis there, the 4,900 QB, and if you look at his last couple games since he's sort of gotten back in the saddle here, you know, he's put up, 19.1, 16.6 DK points the last 2 weeks. I feel like, that's a little bit unnoticed by the field at his price.
And look at the matchups he's had, like at the Chargers and then home against the Vikings. Like, those are two tough defenses.
They are. And it's not as if the Texans are a picnic, but you can easily make the case that they are a little bit weaker than, than the Vikings or the Chargers, whose defenses have been two of the best in the league. So, you know, there's a reason to think he could score 20 points. And if he scores 20 DK points at his salary, like you'll take that. And, you know, if he gets anything above 20, he starts to become like a pretty good play. So, you know, when you look at his last 2 weeks, I think that for his ownership and for his price that he could make sense as a tournament play this week.
All right, I'll put him in there. Do you want to stack him with, I'm guessing maybe Calvin Ridley, but I'll let you.
You figured it. You're on to me. We're gonna.
How I did it.
Yeah, we're gonna stack him with Ridley, and we're actually gonna go even further than that. We're gonna play Pollard too.
Ooh, got the little bit of a Titans onslaught. Here we go.
Can't quite call it an onslaught because it's just these three, but sort of an overstack. Spears hasn't.
Look at his price, man. Come way down for Pollard. Obviously, a couple of bad games.
Spears hasn't practiced this week. He is concussed, I think, is his deal. And so if he misses, right, like he didn't practice. Concussion. So if he misses this week, which I think the tea leaves are sort of saying he's going to, we've seen Pollard really get workhorse usage in the games that Spears is out. And so, you know, the last couple of weeks, as you were alluding to, Pollard, you know, hasn't done that well. Spears has been in. It's been more of a split, and his price has come down. And so I think that, you know, when you look at this stack, it's not going to be super highly owned. I mean, especially when you include Levis, who's going to be basically not owned at all. And it's not expensive. You're able to stack the primary running back, receiver, quarterback. So if the Titans offense has a good game, you're probably getting it. And you can do it for almost for nothing, really, for very little. And so now we're going to go ahead and bring this back, because if we're doing something like this, we're basically predicting the game is going to be a good game environment. You know, if the Titans are scoring enough points to make this stack viable, then the Texans are probably fighting back. And we're going to go put Nico in there.
Yep, 7,600.
And so, I mean, again, the idea here is that the game gets there and Nico has a big day. I think Nico is projected for pretty moderate ownership, around like 10%. And I don't actually know, is that right? Is he about 10%? Yeah, 10%.
Yep. 10%.
I don't actually know if he'll get that high, in my opinion. I think he might end up being lower. He's pretty expensive, and I don't think a lot of people want to pay that much compared to the options that are around him. And, you know, he was one of the best, if not the best, fantasy receiver until he got hurt. Last week, you know, they sort of maybe eased him in a little bit, but he still was productive. But if he just posts a 30-pointer, like, everyone's going to be like, oh, Nico, yeah, duh. Like, how did I forget, you know, that he was an elite receiver? So I like getting him in there this week at moderate ownership. And even if he is 10%, like, that's pretty moderate. So you can play this game stack here, and you're already going to have a pretty unique lineup just from that.
Absolutely, man. Love it.
So the next place we're going to go is a little chalkier. Go ahead and put Achane in there at running back. And I know he's not sneaking up on anybody, right? You know, we're going to try to make it a little more. We're going to stay in this game and try to make it a little more creative what we do in this game. But playing him is just, why is he priced the way that he's priced? I don't know. He's price just isn't really coming up as much as it should, even though he basically scores 20 plus points every week that Tua plays. His price just stays in the 7K range. So, I mean, until it comes up into 8,000 where it really should be, it's hard to not just want to lock him in there. And I just see it as another week where it's like, okay, you don't want to raise his price. And again, it's a good matchup at home too. So if he had a lousy matchup or maybe you could make the justification, but it's a good matchup at home. So, all right, I'll just play him.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, he's underpriced. He's got, good floor, good ceiling. Yeah, it's hard to get away from that one.
And here's where we're going to get creative and try to make it something people might not have as much of. Go ahead and put Tyreek Hill in there too.
Ooh, okay.
And so this is where, I think that we're going to make it a little bit more creative, because I think people will play Tyreek Hill, and obviously people are going to play Achane, but I don't think a lot of people are going to play them together. And the people that do will probably universally play Tua. So playing the two of them like this is a sort of a unique way to stack them without, having them be as chalky as they'll probably be in other builds. And, again, for Tyreek Hill, he's probably the cheapest he's been in years. I mean, I don't know, like 7.2 for him. I mean, did you remember him being below 7 anytime? I don't really.
Yeah. I mean, I think he was 7K when he came back from the injury like 3 weeks ago. But, outside of that, no, this is, I mean, like the low 7Ks, he has not been this cheap since like when he was like when he became Tyreek Hill as we know him for the Chiefs.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead and click on his score. Click on him here, and I know he hasn't put up, the big game, but he still saw 8 targets. Yeah, I mean, if you look at his pricing, I mean, he's been like 7K without Tua, but that doesn't really count. It's just if you look at the earlier year, like go back to the earlier part of the year when you can see like he was high 8Ks for the games that he was priced the way where we thought like Tua was going to be healthy, and so. He's just cheap.
The question is, so you think Achane and Hill can both get there?
I do. And if you look at the Dolphins offense, they focus so much on those two guys, especially in games where they can kind of do whatever they want and they win. They really just pepper those two. And sometimes those guys have big games and they don't bring Tua along. It's an interesting dynamic. And I think it's because they both get a lot of receptions, and those obviously help them more than they're helping the quarterback. And the Dolphins will run in a lot of touchdowns. And sometimes they'll even give Tyreek some carry. They'll do creative things to give him carries around the goal line, but they run in a lot of touchdowns. And so, you'll get yardage from those guys and then get yardage from Tua and then just not get the touchdowns. I feel like that happens with Tua a lot. And because Tua doesn't really give you any rushing upside for him to rush in for the touchdowns, I just feel like he gets left out a lot in stacks. So
yeah, I want to say real fast, just a quick visual cue. I just did the math. They would need 58.8 between the two of them at their salary to get a 4X. So really, if one guy gets 33, then the other could get like 25 and you got 4X. And 4X at a salary of that magnitude it definitely helps you. It's basically like 2 30-point scores.
Oh yeah, if you get 4X, there's high salary guys, then you're happy with that. And I just don't think I think Achane is going to have he's the type of guy who like his role, he just wakes up with 20 points. Like even if he's not having a great game, like he just gets 20.
I like that.
And then I think Hill is just due for that slate breaker. Everybody forgets about him. He's projected for moderate ownership,
10%. Yeah. So same as Nico. Yeah.
Yeah. Nico. And like it could just be one of those weeks where we're sitting here talking next week and we're like, Tyreek Hill was 7,200 and not highly owned. Like,
yeah, I love this play, man. Yeah.
Why didn't we just put him in there?
Everyone was on him at 7K when he came back for that first week, and now he's 7,200, and the excitement has worn off for him, and so now he's kind of going overlooked and not getting all the attention that he was. Yeah, man. So right now, I like this build because I mean we don't got a ton of salary left to work with, but you've got Nico, Hill, Achane, all in there. That's 3 potential 30-point scores right there. Which on a week where there's not going to be many of them, I don't think.
Yeah, it's going to be a tricky week. And at tight end now to stay in that game, and because we're basically predicting that game, it does well. We're going to go with Hunter Henry. And again, he's going to be a relatively owned player. I think he's going to be in the top couple, ownership, but he's underpriced. And he gets a good matchup against Miami, who hasn't been great against the tight ends. And Henry's just been getting used. I mean, he's been getting a lot of targets. And if you can see he got 9 targets last week, 8 targets, 2 weeks ago. They're using him, which makes sense because it's not like they have a receiver that demands attention or demands the ball. So he makes a lot of sense. And especially if Ferguson sits, maybe you look to take the value, with Shoemaker. But if he doesn't, then Schumacher is how you say it. Yeah. Then, but if not, then Henry makes a lot of sense. He makes a lot of sense in there. Sure. And especially with, the 2 Dolphins, you're basically saying this game does well. So, putting him in there keeps the Dolphins aggressive. Maybe he gets the Patriots TDs.
Love it.
Now, awesome. Let's go ahead and throw in our cheap defense of the week, right? And 2,500 has been our number for defense a lot on these lineups. So we're going to put in the Bears. And they are the cheap defense sort of the week. I play a lot of cheap defenses. You never really know what's going to happen to defense. They're at home. They've been a pretty good unit. It's a division game. And I'm not sure why they're not a little more expensive. I mean, I know the Vikings have been a reasonable offense, but you would think that they'd be a little more expensive. I don't know. 2,500 is punt range. And
I think it's a great defense because I think that the Vikings have not looked too scary on offense over the past 3 weeks. And playing against Jacksonville 2 weeks ago, Darnold threw 3 interceptions. So I think that, I don't want to borrow the old Denny Green phrase from way back in the day. They are who we thought they were. But with Sam Darnold, he kind of is starting to be like he is who we thought he was. Because when he first came in the year, and I'll get off the soapbox here in a minute, but he was looking good. It's like, is this the resurrected Sam Darnold? But now, I don't know. We'll see. So I like the Bears as a defense here.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. Maybe it's a good way to bring that line up is that he is who we thought he was. Like, he's Sam Darnold for a reason. Like maybe there's a reason that he's not on, an NFL roster and that they drafted a rookie QB who they were kind of hoping was going to be the guy. And like, he was a caretaker. Like maybe there's a reason. And he's not a world beater the way that he sort of looked to start the year. So I think that it's an interesting sort of way to go. I just think the Bears defense is too cheap. And if I can find a $2,500 defense that I feel comfortable with, then I usually play them because defense is just so high variance.
It is.
Last week I was touting the Steelers defense, said their price was disrespectful against the Ravens at 2,500 and it was. There's just a lot of variance at defense. So I would say just get your $2,500 defense in there and don't think that much harder about it. The 4,800. So you see, we have some different options here, and I considered a lot of these different options. Lockett, you really want to roll the dice on Brooks and say he gets all the work in his first game. But I think the guy who makes the most sense here is to just go ahead and play Odunze. And I don't usually love to play a receiver with their defense, but when you look at how he was used last week in the first game with the new offensive coordinator, he played more snaps than he's been playing, and he saw 10 targets. So, I don't know if that's a fluke, but I do know that the Vikings are aggressive. They blitz, they give you chances to get down the field, and they stuff the run. So if anybody's gonna hurt them for Chicago, it's probably gonna be a passing game piece. And seeing that he got 10 targets last week in the offensive coordinator's first game sort of says to me like that was his intent. Like, we're going to get him more involved. And it's interesting, he was I think the 9th overall pick. He was a top 10 pick. I think 9th was where they got him. And, to not really involve him, which they haven't involved him that much this year. He's sort of been like moderate, usage, really plays less snaps than Allen or Moore and hasn't been involved. Well, hey guys, this guy's the 9th overall pick. And a lot of people thought he was in the same category as, Harrison and Neighbors, who people were saying are the best receiver prospects to come along, in the past 10 years. So why not get him involved? Why not use him? And when you see that the Bears offense was sputtering, obviously they made a change at offensive coordinator. They weren't happy with how things were going. Maybe one of the things they said behind the scenes was like, hey, we have this guy we drafted 9th overall receiver, and really he's not getting involved. So the interim offensive coordinator was like, well, we're gonna pump him the ball 10 times so you guys see that I hear you, that we want to get him involved. And if he gets 10 targets, like, he's a good player as far as I can tell. I mean, I know he's a rookie, but he's a really good prospect, and when they have used him, he produces. So I kind of just see that as I'm going to gamble on he's now more involved than his price says he is, because his price is based on the previous year, rest of the year. And that's really not his role anymore. So I'm going to gamble there and say that he, has a big day.
Awesome, dude. Awesome. Yeah, and that wraps the build. So, yeah, for those of you on the pod, what we finished with here was Will Levis, Tony Pollard, and Calvin Ridley with the Titans stack, the bring back of Nico Collins, and then Devon Achane, Tyreek Hill, and then Hunter Henry, Roma Dunze, and the Bears defense. Papy, great stuff as always, man. Any other thoughts for you before we wrap this one?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a fun week. I kind of like weeks when there's not super obvious games. I feel like this week gives you a lot of options. You don't feel like, oh, I have to stack this team or stack this offense, because that, it's just sort of like, well, what do you think? Because there's a lot of games that are sort of all the same, sort of all moderate. And I always think those weeks are the most fun, where you get to go with some low ownership guys and try to, take your stands.
That's right, man. That's right. Yeah, same here. I'm looking forward to it. All right, guys, thank you for tuning in to the DFS Lab. Head to oneweekseason.com to check out all that we've got going on over there. Papy, as always, man, good luck for you for week 12, and we'll talk to you next week.
All right, see you guys next week.